First discovered in the 16th century by the Spanish conquistadors, the falls were declared a national park early in the 20th century, and now attract tens of thousands of visitors a year. A 100 separate cascades arranged in a horseshoe 3 miles round. The falls are in full flood, 500,000 cubic feet a second, heavily discoloured by the recent rain. With water so brown and moving so fast, the kingfisher seems a little optimistic. The falls create a kind of island of exceptional tropical humidity in a subtropical zone. Plants and trees can grow here that are normally found only much farther north, where the rainfall is greater. And it was the 19th century Swiss botanist, Robert Schrodin, who wrote, "When we stand at the foot of this world of cascades and raising our eyes see 270 feet above us a line of waters, this awesome spectacle of an ocean pouring into an abyss is almost frightening." To me, seeing the same scene but a century later, it's equally impressive. And our journey to the Falls of Iguazu has been no less wonderful.
Tomorrow's wildlife safari visits the home of Argentina's national bird.
Pampas is a South American Indian word meaning wide open space. And in fact, there's 250,000 square miles of this, well over twice the area of Britain. In the days of the Indians, before the white man took over these prairies, the pampas grass was the dominant vegetation of the area, covering almost all of it. In addition to the pampas grass, near the coast, there were extensive groves of tala trees. But inland, the only tree was the ombu. Actually, it's not a tree at all, but a shrub that grows to tree-like proportions. The extensive freshwater marshes of tule and bulrush must have looked to the Indians then much as they do to us today. One of the very earliest estancias, W.H. Hudson stayed here 100 years ago. His gifted writings first brought to the notice of the world the delights of the pampas life and wildlife. Immigrant farmers from Spain, Italy and elsewhere, with the aid of wind pumps and agricultural machinery, with barbed wire and railways built by the British, converted the pampas into one vast productive farm. In addition to horses and pedigree stock, the other usual domestic creatures were imported. Even domestic honeybees were brought across the Atlantic. And 40 English house sparrows, released in 1872, multiplied and spread throughout Argentina, reaching plague proportions, as did the European hare, introduced in 1888. From Australia came the eucalyptus, chosen because its leaves were distasteful to the South American red locust. The changes wrought by the white man have been many and varied. Some obvious, some subtle, some additions, some subtractions. The puma had been banished to the Andes even by Hudson's time. The pampas deer is now nearly extinct, and the plains viscacha, a large rodent, very rare. Yet others seem to go on as before, coexisting peacefully. Particularly perhaps waterside birds like the southern lapwing. And the stealthy night heron. Also apparently unaffected by man's presence, the crested screamer. A very singular species, wrote Hudson, whose large size, great strength and majestic demeanour give it a character among birds somewhat like that of an elephant among mammals. Then there are the species that positively cash in on the changes, taking advantage of the new opportunities provided by man. Eucalyptus trees are taller and may thus be safer for the courting monk parakeets. They build communal apartment houses, each pair having, however, its own private entrance. Pampas woodpeckers, called carpinteros in Spanish, find fence posts an excellent substitute for dead trees. They find food in the crevices and will actually nest in both fence posts and telegraph poles. Their persistent attacks have been known to bring down the poles from time to time, but may also provide for white-rumped swallows holes that they in turn can nest in. As an alternative to hovering in search of prey, burrowing owls now have millions of fence posts to hunt snakes from. Many small birds use wires as lookouts, like the gorgeous vermilion flycatcher and the scissor-tailed flycatchers. Enchanting birds. That's the song of the hornero, Argentina's national bird, chosen because of its cheerful song and the industrious way it goes about building its mud nest, plus the fact that it's said to be religious. W.H. Hudson wrote, "I have frequently been assured by natives that the hornero is a pious bird and always suspends its labours on sacred days. When rain provides an abundance of building material, the foundations can be laid." Both the male and the female horneros collect the mud, the grass and the hair that make up their particular brand of naturally reinforced concrete. Dibbling with the bill presumably prepares the surface so that the next dollop of mud can be keyed in. Hornero means oven, and the oven bird is so called because its nest resembles the clay oven used by Indians for pottery and bread in other parts of Argentina. After 4 days' work, the nest is roofed in. And on the afternoon of the 5th day, the shell is complete and the entrance nicely shaped. Now the pair can line the nest ready for the eggs. Well, this is a last year's oven. It weighs about 11 pounds, and I estimate that the birds between them must have carried more than 1,000 little bits of mud to accumulate this much. The entrance is designed in such a way as to make it difficult for enemies to get in. And we've sawn the top off this old oven to show you the internal design. Here is the curved passageway leading to the actual entrance, a small hole to the inner chamber, where of course the eggs and the chicks were. Now we put the lid back on. It's a neat architectural entity, I'm sure you'd agree. It's weatherproof and it lasts for several seasons. And in subsequent seasons you can frequently find other species that have taken over the oven and occupied it. For example, English house sparrows. Almost any elevated structure is likely to be crowned with an oven. But before the white man provided such sites, ovens were built on the ground in areas where there were no trees to use. Nowadays, it's rare to find ground nesting horneros. A local naturalist and professional wildlife guide, Maurice Rumble, is anxious to show me a bird he says is the most characteristic and unusual one of the Pampas. On many estancias it's persecuted, but here at Los Ingleses the owner protects them. We use horses to cope with the many areas of standing water. They are much more practical than anything mechanical. The vegetation on the surface is a species of floating fern. After only an hour's ride, we sight our quarry, the rhea, spelt R-H-E-A. Hudson called it the grand archaic ostrich of America. Rheas feed on both animal and vegetable matter, picking up grasshoppers and the like and plucking off flower heads and blades of grass. Maurice Rumble is very knowledgeable and remarkably sharp-eyed, frequently bringing to my notice creatures that one might otherwise miss. One of those burrowing owls should be here. The rhea, to compensate for its inability to take wing, has to be able to escape by running well. This bird's just cruising, but flat out, rheas are said to top 40 miles an hour. The action replay shows just how steadily the body is carried along on the large and powerful legs. Rheas are unpopular with some farmers who say they deprive the sheep of too much grass. They are shot and their hides are used for making leather goods, while their feathers are in demand for dusters. The rear displays a certain Victorian elegance and wears a disdainful look, but its shape and appearance have of course evolved to promote its survival rather than our appreciation.
A sprinkling of rear's eggs, just like this one, laid apparently quite accidentally and at random, is the first indication you get that you might be lucky enough to find a properly occupied nest. One rear's egg, one chicken's egg. This one is the equivalent of a dozen of these.
"38 eggs, but laid by 5 or 6 different females. It's important not to touch them and not to stay too long. The 2 yellowish ones must have been laid today. Each lady is led to the nest in turn by the male, whose job it is to incubate and subsequently to care for the young. This brood is about 10 months old and still has the father in attendance. In another year, his brood will themselves be old enough to breed. As in other parts of the world, most Argentine mammals are nocturnal, including to some extent man. Roast lamb, served with a variety of other meats and different sausages, is a treat many travellers are given in Argentina. Eating seems to be the national hobby, and the asado, or barbecue, its most traditional expression, as Manuel, an aging gaucho, tries to explain to me. While the night is still young, Morris, complete with a special head lamp, is keen to go in search of some nightlife, of a kind. Torches are important, though you rely much more at night on your ears. The frogs are deafening. A barn owl, exactly the same species as nests in Britain. Rather a relief to find a familiar bird when so many of the South American species are total strangers. You also rely more on your nose in the dark. It's a zorrino, a skunk. If we don't scare it too much, we should avoid getting sprayed by its personal aerosol. It's in search of grubs and insects. Morris checks a trap set earlier. No luck. What can this be? Well, Morris thinks it's probably an opossum. It can hardly get away unless it jumps into the next tree. It is an opossum, one of the very few marsupials or pouched animals found outside Australia. Hudson once saw an old female opossum carrying 11 young. The saying play possum is derived from the fact that this animal, when caught, feigns death. We've been hoping to trap one to demonstrate the point, but instead we find we've captured an armadillo. They're strong little blighters, not at all easy to handle. It's like a giant woodlouse. They're resourceful too.
Well, Jeffrey, let's have a look at this fellow now. This is an armadillo. There are 20 species in South America. This one, come on, Chappie, this one is the hairy armadillo. You'll soon see why. Come on. They do this, you know. There we are. The hairy armadillo, both top and bottom, you see?
Yes.
Armadillos are the only mammals in the world with hard shells all over their bodies and on their heads, rather like tortoises, but these are articulated.
He needs flexibility.
He needs
a shell, but he needs flexibility.
Yeah. They're pretty well omnivorous, feeding on anything from roots through small birds, mammals, birds' nests. And this species even feeds on carrion. He's got tiny little eyes. They were chiefly diurnal years ago, but man now hunts him for food and has driven him into the darkness for protection. They've got tremendously powerful feet. Perhaps you can see them there.
You can indeed.
These, of course, he uses for burrowing, where he's digging his burrows where he spends the day. Perhaps if we...
Whoops! Come on, Morris, get it. Oh, blimey, what an animal. Ah, now we've lost the damn thing.
Next afternoon, out on the marshes, Maurice Rumble tries to put me through my paces as a naturalist. First he says, "What are these?" And he won't take loganberries for an answer. And what connection, he asks, have these with these? Well, clearly the first are the eggs laid by the second. They were snails' eggs. But thirdly, Maurice wants to know who exactly has been eating the snails and dumping all his empties here. The shell is in perfect condition, as is the stopper, or operculum as it's called. This snail is a shallow water species called Parmesia, and very difficult to winkle out. Underwater, it relaxes, bringing out 2 antennae and a breathing tube, which means it must approach the surface at intervals to take in air. A snorkeling snail. But who does eat them? The answer, curiously enough, is this handsome bird of prey. It feeds exclusively on this one kind of snail and has never been known to eat any other food. Notice the bird's thin, sharply pointed bill, its winkle picker. The hunting snail kite flies in a leisurely fashion, usually into the wind or across it, looking down into the water. It grabs a snail in one foot. Maurice explains that the bird will have to probe for a crack between the stopper and the lip of the shell. But first, the snail must be correctly positioned to ensure the maximum purchase. There. Past the operculum, the bird now cuts the columella muscle. And the now helpless snail is pulled out before being eaten. The shell is knocked off with the left talon, and the naked snail awaits its final fate. We find the process so fascinating, we wait, hoping to see it again. Unbelievably common here in Argentina, this same species in the United States, where it's called the Everglade kite, is nearly extinct. Young birds sent from Argentina for study may help to keep the American population going. If W.H. Hudson could return today to his beloved Pampas, he would be surprised and delighted at the continuing abundance of wildlife, despite the white man's changes. Though he would also sound a warning note, for with the ever-growing human population and the ever more intensive farming, the days of the snail kite and of the other wild creatures could so easily be numbered.
Never filmed before.
The one road south across Patagonia. Behind us, the hospitable Argentine Pampas. Ahead, a desolate desert of scrub, 3 times the size of Britain. The end of the tarmac. We'll be on dirt roads now for the rest of the expedition. That's 3 more months. Dust, potholes, stones. The jarring effect on equipment, men, and men's tempers is quite considerable. Patagonia covers 25% of Argentina, but only 1% of the population choose to live here. So it's not the best place to break down and have to pitch tents for the night. But still, it's only 4 days now to our next major destination, the coast. A magnificent natural amphitheatre. The desiccating winds are from inland and bring the scrub desert right down to the coast.
The first European ever to step ashore anywhere along the coast of Patagonia, which stretches from just north of here almost 1,000 miles to Cape Horn, was Ferdinand Magellan, the Portuguese navigator. That was about 450 years ago. His Spanish sailors nicknamed the local Aborigines, the Indians that they found here, Patagonese, which means big feet. We're going to explore part of this coast for wildlife, and we start here in the Valdez Peninsula.
Not exactly teeming with animals, you'd think. Well, no. But it's really surprising when you actually camp here how the place can come alive. A diminutive cactus, about as far south as cacti grow. Berry-bearing bushes provide food for ants to take home to their young, provided they can get a grip. Ants, in turn, may fall prey to the newly hatched tawny-throated dotterel. This dotterel, according to the books, nests only in the Andes, but we find it as much at home at sea level as the elegant crested tinamous, no doubt also searching for insects. Tinamous are game birds of a very ancient bird family. The Patagonian mockingbird after its share of the berries. The redness of the berries is to attract the birds and help with seed dispersal. The markings on the birds are for camouflage, to avoid enemies like the bird-eating spider. More creatures already than I would have expected to find in the scrub, provided you follow up the clues and really look for them. Now, is there anything to be made of this? It looks like an old burrow that's caved in. It must surely have been the home of quite a sizable mammal, a fox perhaps. Now, this one's occupied, but by a herbivore and not a carnivore, it would seem. I decide to watch from the Land Rover. Many animals accept cars much more readily than humans on foot. Perhaps the thing only comes out at night. Aha, it's a hare, one of those introduced ones from Europe. But no, it can't be, because hares don't burrow. It's a mara, a creature I was told I'd be lucky to find at all, let alone see at close quarters. Another one. What an extraordinary animal. There are two pairs. The mara is shy and rare. It lives only in Argentina, and this is the first time that it's ever been filmed. It can cope with really tough vegetation. The mara's a rodent, but early European explorers like Magellan must have thought it was a hare, which is not a rodent. It superficially resembles a hare because it fills the same place in nature here as European hares do in Europe. A family portrait, father, mother, and a litter of 6. It really is our lucky day. We're never to see the home life of the mara again. The young must surely be old enough for solid food, though there is one that's still suckling. The mara has a head like a horse and can canter like a horse, but just watch them bounce along. A super animal. Years ago, what must Magellan and his sailors have thought when they first saw them?
It's not often that you get the opportunity to examine at really close quarters, on land, an animal that spends the majority of its life at sea. But with the sea elephant, this is possible. Here, a couple of cubs, 2 months old, making occasional sneezing noises, as you'll probably hear. And here, a pretty sizable male sea elephant. The male is much bigger than the female, and the biggest males of all may measure 21 feet long and weigh up to 3.5 tons. The hind limbs of this mammal are shaped nowadays to form a kind of fish-like tail, a propeller unit. The forelimbs act as flippers. Sea elephant is a marine mammal now, Formerly, of course, its ancestors were terrestrial mammals on 4 legs on land like many other mammals. The eyes of the animal are particularly large, and this is to enable them to hunt at night, in murky water, or in very deep water. It's the great bulk of the sea elephant that's given it its name, sea elephant. But it's also the proboscis that's contributed to the name. This is an inflatable kind of nose, and I'm going to shuffle forward now in the hope that the animal will give a demonstration of the use of its proboscis. Not quite sure how close he's going to allow me to get before he reacts. He's being very patient. Come on, chum, let's show us what you've got. No, you see, he's particularly approachable, particularly lethargic.
Over the next week, I get to know the local population pretty well. It's late spring, and the beach opposite our camp is littered with 100 or so pups. Most of the mothers have already returned to the ocean, but not before being mated on the beach. Bulls compete for females, and each beachmaster will come to command a harem of 20 cows once he's 12 or 13 years old. By the end of the season, males show many scars of battle, but elephant seals have evolved blood that can clot in 5 seconds flat, no doubt to cope with these gashes. The only explanation for gravel throwing seems to be that the sun is too hot. After all, the sea elephant is carrying 6 inches of subcutaneous fat, which is really for use at sea as a defense against the cold Southern Ocean. During their 6 or 8 weeks ashore, they live only off their blubber, and to help stave off hunger pangs, will swallow large stones. Having been weaned in 3 weeks on the richest milk known to science, the deserted pups wait till hunger drives them to sea for the first time in their lives. These are now about 6 weeks old. Although nowadays used to help propel the animal through water, it's easy to see that these kid-gloved flippers were once the forepaws of a land mammal. Rubbing 2 hind flippers together. Fat as a barrel, nothing to do. Low water exposes play pools for pups. Elephant seals can sleep submerged for 4 or 5 minutes at a time. When they hunt in the ocean for fish and squids, adults may stay down 20 minutes and dive as deep as 200 feet. The turn of the tide. I've long had an ambition to join a marine mammal in its own environment. They're usually quite friendly, in fact positively inquisitive and playful. Unfortunately, though, by slipping, I frighten off one pup. Here comes another to see what I'm like. In their own element, they seem to feel secure. The only thing I find they don't like is when I accidentally touch their whiskers. I have to tell you that I'm really quite frightened, even though I know there's nothing to be frightened of. Bulls are aggressive only on land, and even there seems to be no record of anyone ever being savaged. Bored, he swims off. All of him. In 25 years as a naturalist, I can recall no more charming experience. But just how many of these sea elephants are there in Patagonia? Well, as it happens, the only ones in all South America are here on the Peninsula Valdez, halfway down Argentina's Atlantic seaboard. We fly to where the elephants are concentrated. After a 4-hour survey, I conclude that there must have been about 3,000 breeding animals, the only mainland colony left anywhere in the world. They must have been much commoner all round southern South America in Magellan's day, before the sealing industry got going. A southern right whale. There she blows. Our pilot turns in the tightest circles that he dares to make. There are more. Southern right whales were reduced by the whaling industry to numbers so small that they were no longer a commercial proposition. A big right whale might be 55 feet long and weigh as much as 25 tons. These few must be up from the subantarctic to give birth in the warmer waters of one of these bays. Let us hope that this endangered mammal may yet be able to make a comeback. Our next location is another Patagonian headland, Point Tombo, a city for seabirds of many different kinds. There are 3 species of cormorant alone. There are a few rock cormorants, many blue-eyed cormorants, and there's a pair of Guarnay cormorants, the ones with black necks. I'm determined to census the seabirds as well, and by pacing out, determining the density and then multiplying up, I arrive at a figure of 5,000 for the cormorants, 5,000 pairs that is, mainly of blue-eyed cormorants. By fluttering its gular pouch, the bird helps to keep itself cool. Most of the birds are down on eggs, though some courtship is still in progress. A male with nesting material that also functions as a bunch of flowers. The waiting female. They go through a mutual courtship display. And then groom one another. Blue-eyed cormorants, Guarnay cormorant, red round the eye. The Guarnay is the famous billion-dollar bird of the Pacific coast of South America, where its droppings, accumulated over centuries, are quarried as a fertilizer. The nesting of the Guarnay here on the east coast of South America is a new discovery. It's never been known to nest anywhere around the Atlantic before. cormorant colonies are harried by egg thieves, like the dolphin gull. They're persistent, but there are only 25 nesting pairs of them. The sheathbill's also after cormorant eggs, but it nests only in the Antarctic. Of kelp gulls, I estimate 30,000 pairs. They'll take eggs too, but they're mainly inshore fishermen. Of great skuas, only 25 couples, nesting on the bare shingle. Stand by a skua home for a moment and you invite trouble. I received 2 or 3 very painful clouts. Great skuas normally live by bullying gulls and getting them to disgorge their catch. And for this reason, their nests are strategically sited round the periphery of the gull colony. The great skua, a pirate of the sky.
Magellan and his crew were also among the very first white people to set eyes on a most peculiar bird, one that brays like an ass, can't fly, and is ridiculously tame. No, not all penguins are from the Antarctic. This one, from southern South America, is officially called the Magellan penguin.
Not perhaps the most beautiful of the world's 18 kinds of penguin, but possibly one of the most vocal, seeming to mimic a donkey. Quite how I'm to count all these, I'll have to consider. Like the sea elephant, the Magellan penguin is a marine animal coming ashore only to reproduce. Likewise, too, it can overheat, so most of them burrow or try to nest in the shade, no matter how slight. Penguin territories are small, but they are defended. By plotting the nesting areas on a map, we find the birds occupy the best part of a square mile. Now to determine their density. I must say I feel rather foolish distributing sugar lumps in the presence of birds that eat only fish. But I have to know how many nests there are in the sample area marked out with a cable. Only in this way can I avoid counting the same nest twice. Believe it or not, there are nearly 500,000 nests. That's 1 million breeding penguins. Despite the dust, we camp here for a week. One of the risks of an extended safari is that you can lose your sense of proportion. In Argentina, it's called pan inglés, English bread. They obviously think we have rather big appetites. Patagonia has long been renowned for its vastness and for its boisterous wind. Patagonia's reputation for dust storms is more recent. The wind erosion is due to excessive overgrazing by man's sheep. Locals say you don't have to travel across Patagonia to see the country. Stand in one place and the country will blow past you. 8 hours of this is an exceedingly unpleasant experience, and we lose 3 tents, ripped up by the sheer strength of the storm. Gale-force winds and heavy seas are no problem to master mariners like penguins. The sea is their home. The coast of Patagonia has been our home for a month. Not perhaps as comfortable as some homes, but full of reward for a travelling naturalist.
Tomorrow's wildlife safari at 1:35 on BBC Two travels to the Los Glaciares National Park in the Andes.
This is the entrance to the Los Glaciares National Park, and with me, Francisco Erize, an Argentine naturalist.
This is my favorite national park. It's a vast area, 100 miles long and about 50 miles wide. It offers the most spectacular scenery in the whole of Argentina. The ice cap and the glaciers flowing from it into the lakes, snow-covered peaks in the background, shelters a most interesting wildlife. In fact, it is one of the best areas in these southern regions for wildlife.
Well, sounds a great place, Francisco. Let's go.
Los Glaciares means, of course, the Glaciers National Park. In area, it's bigger than the English county of Norfolk, and of the 15 Argentine national parks, it's both the most beautiful and the least known. At present, only a few thousand visitors come every year, and parts of the higher terrain are quite unexplored. Park rangers are stationed at 4 strategic points within the park. The park staff in all is 28 persons. Ranger Hernandez on Rapido sets off daily to make sure his visitors have no problems. In addition to camping, it's hoped the park will become popular for fishing, sailing, climbing, and perhaps even skiing. From the wildlife standpoint, it's a surprise and perhaps rather a disappointment to find 7 vast farms still operating inside the national park, even though the park boundaries were laid down as long ago as 1937. Farmers claim that upland geese compete with their sheep for the grass, and they shoot them. Ashy-headed geese are also grazers. Birds of prey are also shot. All this in a national park. True, the farms were here before the park, but the land is now state-owned, and why leases have not been allowed to lapse is unclear. On the other hand, the park authorities have successfully repulsed threats of timber felling. On 1 or 2 scores, then, the park doesn't meet the United Nations definition of a true national park. On other scores, though, it gets full marks as an ever-changing theatre of the elements, for sheer scenic grandeur, and for the unspoilt ecology of the high-altitude forests and the mountain tops. Los Glaciares National Park is an inspiration to any visitor, even to a local man like Francisco Erize.
The floral symbol of our park is perhaps the notro, a blood-red flowering bush. Higher up, Escalonia hags the ground to avoid the wind and grows in cushion formation to conserve heat.
lizards bask in the midsummer heat of December, eyed by a Chilean eagle that so far escaped the farmer's gun. Birds of prey are an important element in the jigsaw of nature's economy.
Our buff-necked ibis, an extraordinary bird with an extensible wattle, a kind of avian dewlap. A colony is sighted over water to provide protection against enemies like the Patagonian foxes. The young are well grown and will soon be making their first flight. A shorter bill and a rather more scruffy appearance distinguishes the adolescent. Buff-necked ibises are summer visitors to this region and will soon be flying to the north of my country for the winter.
Unspoilt forests of southern beaches, Nothophagus to the botanist. They're home to the Austral parakeet, easily the southernmost of the 300 members of the parrot family.
The Carpintero Patagónico, as we call it in Spanish, the largest and most impressive woodpecker in South America. The female is mainly black with a distinctively curved crest. She's delivering food to her single nesting. A scarlet hood distinguishes the male Magellanic woodpecker. He must be the closest living relative of Woody Woodpecker, the American cartoon character.
You'd think this a perfectly ordinary kind of small bird feeding in a perfectly ordinary way. But wait. No, it uses this very curious back and forth raking motion to uncover its prey. I've never before seen a bird scratching with both feet simultaneously. It's clearer in slow motion. A rufous-collared song sparrow, collecting food for its newly fledged youngster.
If you in Britain have white swans, and the Australians have black ones, then we in Argentina have pied swans. Tradition plays an important role in the life of all swans. 20 pairs or so of our black-necked swans return every spring to nest on this island in one of the lakes. The male has a very large knob, and the female with a smaller knob.
Francisco tells me that although they tend to nest together, black-necked swans are nevertheless quite territorial just offshore, males in particular being jealous of their property rights. Right away from the nesting island, though, they congregate peacefully. Not that the weather's very peaceful. Storm or calm, they have to eat, plunging their heads into the icy water in search of water weeds. The one on the left has tiny cygnets on her back and is having to hold them down with her wings. Calmer waters are safer, and the young are allowed to take a look around. To us, the sight of a swan carrying its cygnets on its back is one of the most appealing examples of parental care in the animal kingdom. The obvious advantages to the cygnets are that they can sleep warm and dry in a feather bed without having to go ashore, and that they're also out of reach of most predators.
You will readily understand why the black-necked swan is so popular among our people and why it is the symbol of our Argentine society for nature conservation.
Francisco Erize is keen to show me the local species of wild camel, the guanaco. Once common right across the great plain of Patagonia, the guanaco has been much persecuted and still is, even, I fear, inside the national park. Guanacos are rather nervous and jittery, though it's easier to approach them on horseback than on foot, particularly if they're off their guard, dust bathing. Many kinds of mammal bathe in dust, no doubt to clean their fur.
They know we're here, and they are not too happy. Using the ground as cover, we have spent some time stalking a small herd. Now we shall spy on them, behaving absolutely naturally.
Even for Erize, who knows the animal quite well, it's difficult to win with the guanaco. Charles Darwin thought the guanaco an elegant animal in a state of nature with a long, slender neck and fine legs. But George Gaylord Simpson, the American naturalist, wrote, "A guanaco looks like a small humpless camel, which it is. And it also looks like a careless mixture of parts intended for other beasts and turned down as below standard. It has a head, something like that of a hornless deer, long ears like a mule, a neck that tries but fails to reach the giraffe standard, a scrawny, shapeless body, and gangling legs like those of a young colt." Poor old guanaco. I must say I rather like them. The guanaco is rather similar to the vicuña we saw in the Andes at a much earlier stage of this expedition. Guanacos are hunted and brought down with a weapon the white man inherited from the Indian, the bolus. Weighted with stones, the thongs will entangle themselves round the animal's legs and bring it down. A local gaucho demonstrates how the bolus is thrown. A shepherd returns from a day on the hill, pelts of young guanacos skinned on the spot, slung about his saddle. A dozen more are pegged out in the sun to dry. Provided they're killed humanely and cropped in sensible numbers, modern conservationists do not object to the exploitation of wild animals. But in the case of young guanacos, the slaughter is on a wide and indiscriminate scale and seems entirely indefensible within a national park. Such poaching is not easy to stop, but if there were no farming community, the conservation of wildlife within the park would be much easier.
A fine, clear day, suitable for a journey by water to the glaciers. But of course, by the time we arrive, the weather has changed.
On the top of the Andes, up there, is the South Patagonian ice cap. It's a vast area where snow has accumulated over centuries and compacted itself into ice. The ice comes downhill under its own weight, forming, for example, this glacier, the Uppsala, one of a dozen such glaciers here in the Los Glaciares National Park of Argentina. Parts of Britain must have looked very much like this 25,000 years ago, during the last ice age.
It takes something like 30 years for the ice to move the 10 miles down the slope before the bergs are born, or carved, as the glaciologists say. After 3 hours ashore near the Uppsala Glacier, we return to our small boat. The wind has changed, and we're icebound. Although it's already 4 in the afternoon, we decide to tackle it. Erize is confident we'll get out. I am rather less sure. Donaldo McIver, the interpreter, is too busy to think about it. Douglas Fisher says nothing, but keeps on filming, even getting out of the boat onto a floe. The problem is that slowly and imperceptibly these great blocks of ice are closing in on us. If the wind really gets up, they'll pack tight. The boat will be lifted and tip one way or the other, and we shall have no choice but to abandon it and try and get over the ice to the shore. And by the time all this happens, it could well be dark. The risk with bergs is that your weight can just shift their center of gravity and they roll over. The outboard can't be used now, but if we get out, it will be vital. I make the decision after 2 hours and only 800 yards of painful progress to return to the shore and try again the next day.
I disagree and say we should plough on. But soon the ice decides for us. Only one path is left, and we have no choice but to follow it. Our spirits soar as we realize we are out of the trap. Before Ronaldo gets the outboard to splutter into life, we drift dangerously close to one of the great bergs. Once clear, we find the launch has gone to get another small boat and search for us next day. After a rough night on the shore, 2 blankets between 4 of us, we are rescued next morning. The end of our adventure.
2 miles across its front and 8 miles long, the Moreno Glacier. It's an exception among local glaciers in that it's advancing and has been doing so since just before the turn of the century. All the other glaciers have been retreating, while the Moreno has been pushing its snout further forward each winter. Until, in one winter, she runs aground on the shore on this side of the lake, thereby creating a great natural dam.
From the ice cap, the Moreno grinds downhill, damming the gap here. On this side, the water flows north into Lago Argentino. But on the upstream side of the ice dam, the water is trapped and a natural reservoir created.
Large areas of land are inundated until the warmth of late summer melts a breach, the flood escapes, and the waters equalize. The glacier first ran aground in 1917, but soon it made an annual habit of closing the gap. Winter after winter, the great wall of ice established a deeper and deeper bridgehead, bulldozing the soil and knocking over and killing mature trees. As a play of great natural forces, this is incredible to see.
The summer melt of 1954 brought no rupture. The dam held firm. Snow melt from the surrounding cordilleras flowed relentlessly into the reservoir. 75 feet of water built up over 2 years, flooding buildings and drowning thousands of trees. Worried by the threat to life and property downstream of a great wall of water suddenly unleashed, the government ordered the bombing of the Moreno Glacier before even more water accumulated. But still the ice stood firm.
After 26 months, the glacier finally gives in, fortunately fairly gradually. Today, the Great White Bulldozer is further forward than ever before, that's to say ever before this century. Locals are saying that it will survive not merely 3 seasons, but perhaps many, and that the water will have to find the next outlet at the other end of this lake. Only time will tell.
The Great Andean chain steps across the Magellan Strait into the Land of Fire, Tierra del Fuego. Apart from icebound Antarctica, we're now crossing the southernmost landmass in the world. This has to be the last leg of our roving safari, for it's only a few miles more to Cape Horn, just across the border in Chile. Mariners can avoid the open seas of the tempestuous Cape by threading their way through the Beagle Channel immediately to the north. Tierra del Fuego is one large island the size of Ireland and thousands of smaller islands. To get to them, a small naval craft. I'm excited to be taken to a colony of South American sea lions. These animals are much further south than the books say they should be. Sea lions haul out on small rocks because rocks have sanctuary value. No land enemies here, and it can be difficult even for man to get ashore. But this lion's true element is the sea, where they're so at home that inquisitiveness easily overcomes fear. Now just watch the last one coming down. It's a large male, and you can see exactly why early explorers thought this animal was some kind of lion, a seagoing lion. A young male, not yet breeding, and with only a suggestion of a mane. And another old male, much more lion-like. Sea lions can close their nostrils to shut out the cold southern ocean. The pronounced whiskers are very sensitive feelers, useful in murky water and also in courtship. A mature male can weigh up to a ton, 4 times as much as each of his sleek wives. He maintains a harem of perhaps 10 or 20 cows. The females at once remind us of the closely related Californian sea lion, the one that balances a ball on its nose. Young males sparring. They have to wait years past the time when they're capable of fathering pups before they actually win a harem and do so. In an emergency, the baby can swim from birth, but it doesn't have enough blubber for effective insulation against the cold sea until it's several weeks old. The southernmost sea lions in the world, only a few miles from the southernmost city in the world, Ushuaia, founded by a British missionary almost exactly 100 years ago. And here too, the southernmost public television service in the world, and the southernmost house sparrows introduced from Europe. Down here they seem to hop sideways. The southernmost citizens in the world, and to cap it all, the southernmost Coca-Cola plant. The Argentine Navy has an important base at Ushuaia. Ushuaia, a happy, sleepy town built on a slope with its feet in the water. Scavenging in the harbour, a giant petrel, or stinker as sailors call it, because of the evil-smelling fluid it coughs up in self-defence. It's a bird we're to see more of. A very different scavenger, the crested caracara, feeding on a drowned sheep. Chimango caracaras gather round, but they'll have to wait their turn. Rather too late for the really thick meat is the turkey vulture. His unfeathered face avoids problems with blood. There are no crows in South America at all, and these Chimango caracaras have come to fill a crow-like role down here. A scene strangely reminiscent of Africa. One of the most elusive birds in all South America is a peculiar kind of duck called the torrent duck. Elsewhere in Argentina, I've failed to find it. Tierra del Fuego offers the last chance, though not a very good chance, for the book says it's locally extinct. Apparently, the torrent duck deliberately chooses to live by the swiftest flowing water because it feeds on a tiny invertebrate that can be found only in highly oxygenated white water. The top of the falls. And no, they're not torrent ducks, but a familiar upland goose family. We're about to witness a rare natural drama. There are 4 well-grown but still flightless goslings and their mother. The mother takes off, deserting her offspring. The goslings try to battle their way up the waterfall after her, but obviously it's hopeless. Using wings as paddles, 2 young ones make for the shore. No wings to fly, no previous experience of this kind of problem. But by instinct or luck, all 4 find calmer waters and a tiny cove. But they're walled in. The only route to survival is still the river. I'm powerless to help the first 2 goslings that sail quietly past, to be taken over the next fall. They're gone, and soon they're to be followed by the other 2. Death by misadventure, filmed exactly as it happened, and sad to witness. One can only say that nature is without sentiment. Upland geese in general are still with us because they produce enough offspring to absorb natural losses. Not that waterfalls can account for many, it would be starvation or enemies. And after all that, our true quarry. Yes, it's the Andean torrent duck, or indeed a pair of Andean torrent ducks. Now let's just see how they cope. Fantastic, skittering across the water with no problem at all, and well able to cope with the current and with the rocks. The female and the drake, very differently plumaged. The soberly clad female is less likely to attract an enemy when brooding the ducklings. Her mate is more flamboyant, probably to make him more attractive sexually. He's still in wing mode and has to trail through the water after his mate. Only for this reason are we able to get really close and secure the most intimate film ever taken of this elusive, rare and shy water bird. Just look at his enormous feet. They stand him in good stead against the boiling torrent. On the very lip of the waterfall, there he is, only a foot from the edge, paddling about with impunity. He swims along the lip. He's safer by that little rock. He looks for food. Now it's back to the water, dropping immediately behind him to the right. The torrent duck, a bird that's evolved to live with raging waters and not extinct in Tierra del Fuego after all. Also exclusively associated with these torrents is the waterfall plant. It thrives only in these humid conditions. Tierra del Fuego is the happy hunting ground of a botanist from Reading, David Moore, who's on his 5th visit to Fireland. He tells me first about the trees of Tierra del Fuego.
Only 5 species can grow down here. This one is winter's bark, named after Captain John Winter, who sailed as far as here with Francis Drake on the famous voyage round the world. The bark was used by early voyagers against scurvy. It contains vitamin C. and the seeds of the same tree were ground down as a cheap substitute for pepper. But the most widespread trees are the southern beeches, Nothofagus, on whose branches I find these plant parasites, a kind of mistletoe called Misodendron. The growths are a distinctive feature of these forests and are found nowhere else. Among the very distinctive flowers found on the forest floor is a singularly handsome orchid. It's Codon orchis, the white-flowered dog orchid. The ornamentation must originally have evolved to attract pollinating insects, but nowadays the plant appears to me to fertilize itself. Not all violets are violet. The woodland violets of Tierra del Fuego have yellow flowers, but are obviously related to our British plants. The fuchsia, commonly grown in British gardens, down here is a wildflower, surviving hailstorms and howling winds. Another shape familiar to British gardeners is the lady slipper, the calceolaria, common on the steppes of northern Tierra del Fuego, along with fields of wild sweet pea. By the shore itself, there's the wild southern celery. It too was plucked and eaten by sailors to counteract scurvy. But perhaps most interesting of all to me is this diminutive buttercup, because I found the self-same plant on the other side of the world, near New Zealand, thousands of miles away. How could such plants cross the vast stretches of intervening ocean? Well, one possible answer in the case of this plant, the Acina, or stick-to-me-tight, which is also found on islands in about these latitudes on both sides of the globe, is that the seeds get hooked onto the plumage of seabirds, such as the giant petrel. These birds are well known to circumnavigate the southern oceans regularly, helped by the prevailing westerlies. It may seem as chancy as the pools, but of course there is a pools winner.
Leaving David Moore behind, I now embark on the most memorable adventure of our whole 6 months in Argentina. Aboard an ice patrol vessel of the Republican Armada, we're bound for the remotest uninhabited island in Tierra del Fuego, followed by one of our friends, a stinker. Incredible to think that giant petrels really do fly round and round the globe in these latitudes and are almost certainly responsible for dispersing those little seeds. The tempestuous Le Maire Strait. After 24 hours at sea, Isla de los Estados, Staten Island, rather different from the New York one. But the captain is now reluctant to put us ashore on this mighty fog-bound rock. He can't believe that a lot of film people really know what it's going to be like, and is worried because he can't pick us up himself, but has to arrange for another ship. I have to insist that I have met his one condition, 21 days' food for an intended 7-day stay. He thinks we're mad, but 6 hours later, we're ashore. Honestly, there's no life like a life next to the elements. 4 souls on an island 40 miles long, an island virtually untouched by man. Feeding the fire, research assistant Robin Prithock. Donaldo McIver, no interpreting for him to do here. And behind the camera, thinking about his favourite subject, Doug Fisher. Not consomme coming to the boil, but the cleanest fresh water we can find. This is the only place in Argentina where you can hope to find the rockhopper penguin. But instead of it nesting in a nice, convenient, sheltered bay like this one, the bird has chosen instead the exposed slopes that face Cape Horn, and it's quite impossible for us to land there. So we're having to camp here, but tomorrow we're going to trek right across the island. Next day dawns clear and we set off in good spirits. The wind is constant and prevails from the southwest. Not much doubt about that. 5 miles sounds little, but it's just not possible to make more than a mile an hour over this stuff. Or through tussock grass. It's literally true that you can't walk through tussock grass without continually falling over. That's all tussock grass, and the rock hoppers should be at the end. The largest of marine plants grows in this part of the world. Some fronds of giant kelp may extend to hundreds of feet. A familiar kelp gull. And these must be the rock hoppers, birds not porpoises, but porpoising in at high speed. A beautiful action. Here it is again in slow motion. The nearest penguins come to flying. Porpoising allows them to breathe and to navigate. Normal motion again now, as the rock hoppers rock hop, like men in a sack race. Pools of fresh water well above high water mark mean that the birds can have a bath. Or if they prefer, a shower.
This is one of the very few places where the penguins can actually get up the cliff. That's why you've got this highway here. And once they're up the cliff, they fan out left and right, and they climb even as much as 1,000 feet above the sea, occupying a vast area of the tussock moorland.
First, a returning bird has to negotiate the rocks. And it may walk, slide, or hop. Heavy padding on the breast helps here, as well as when porpoising ashore. It's home for our penguin, but it's only a tiny part of a colony occupying several miles of coast and numbering millions of birds. Our adult summons up the food from its stomach, stimulated by the antics of a hungry and impatient youngster. The meal is of partly pre-digested fish and crustaceans that may have been caught many miles out to sea. Between bouts of fishing, the parents seem to rest. The few molting birds are adolescent 1- and 2-year-olds. Free of parental duties, they can afford to molt early. While changing coat, Penguins dare not risk the cold water temperatures and have to live off their fat for several weeks. New eyebrows too. Distinctive eyebrows help rockhoppers distinguish one another from other kinds of penguins. The tiny scale-like feathers on the wings have been replaced too, as well as the true scales on the feet. Penguins are tame on land because they've not needed to learn fear. Enemies on islands are few. It's the same principle as the sea lion rock. It's when penguins go to sea that they risk their lives. They're holding back for some reason. A gull and our South American sea lion. It's a bull. All back, they seem to say, but he's got one. The first of 20 he's to get this afternoon. But with young to feed, the parents have no choice but to run the gauntlet. The sea lion has learnt this and knows exactly where to wait, by the highway. Reports by Victorian ships' captains that sea lions took penguins have been consistently pooh-poohed by scientists. Our observations, backed by these pictures, are the first undeniable proof. Sea lions have to live too. We need feel no more sorry for the penguin than for the fish penguins pursue. Except that here, it's so easy to catch penguins, the sea lion pursues a surplus he doesn't need to eat. Surplus killing, however, is a rare phenomenon in nature. The 20th penguin. It's cat and mouse and vultures. Having now decapitated the last hapless penguin, the bored sea lion swims off, leaving the carcass to the gulls and the stinkers.
In 6 months, we've travelled from the roof of the Andes in the extreme north of Argentina, inside the tropics, 3,000 miles south to this dank subantarctic outpost. Here, the great mountain chain of the Andes comes up for a last breather before finally disappearing into the Southern Ocean. And here, too, we end our wildlife safari to the Argentine.